Hello and welcome to Media Monitor on the SABC News Channel, independent and impartial. Now, this is where we take a look inside the world of media, analysing the trends, the issues and the reporting of some of the week's top stories. I'm Peter Ndora and this is what's coming up on the show. Can corporate and civil society play a role in stopping further attrition in the media sector and help provide a wider media landscape for the country? Well, find out how the chairperson of SANEF believes it can be done. And with local government elections on the horizon, more and more attention is being put on the potentially disruptive influence of disinformation. Media Monitoring Africa's William Bird gives us his thoughts on this burning issue. And in our News and History feature this week, we take you back to 1996, and that's when former President of South Africa, Nelson Mandela, visited the United Kingdom and spent some time with someone he affectionately called Elizabeth. So that's the show, but remember, you can engage with us on social media using the Twitter handle, #SABC Media Monitor, and you can also share your views with us on WhatsApp, and the number is 065-862-4548. That number again, 065-862-4548. So before we get into those highlighted stories on the program, let's do what we normally do at this time, and that's take a look at the front pages of your Sunday newspapers this morning. And we start with the Sunday Times. And the Sunday Times is leading with the ANC delegation that visited Harare this past week using an Air Force jet, with questions being raised about abuse of state assets. It also appears that no lockdown rules are being applied by top brass and no quarantine either. Whilst Minister Mapisa Ngakula was given permission to travel, it's believed that the minister's talk with her counterpart didn't last even an hour. The City Press is leading with this story, saying that the ANC is plotting a defence against negative narrative as the list of its party members accused of misconduct appears to be growing. The party's parliamentary caucus apparently held a virtual meeting led by Chief Whip Pemi Majodina and sought to ensure that all their MPs were prepared to face opposition party members, including plans to reject a request for an ad hoc meeting to deal with the looting of funds. The Sunday Independent headline is about a black businesswoman accusing an Eastern Cape mogul of using her documents to win contracts in a 35 million rand fronting scandal. Now, Tandi Chibilika says that construction boss Willie Krief misrepresented himself after he allegedly used her company details to score multi-million rand COVID-19 contracts from the Provincial Department of Public Works and Infrastructure. The Sunday Tribune leads with the tender rigging scandal that has seen embattled former eThekwini Mayor Zandile Gumede and others charged in what's being described as the city's biggest corruption scandal. It seems now that Nedbank is under scrutiny for processing a deposit of 100,000 rand without putting the depositor's personal details, and this is against the Financial Intelligence Centre Act rules of 2001. And finally, the Sunday World is leading with a sad story that many families, I'm sure, are dealing with in the country. The Minister of Basic Education, Angie Motshekga, and her family are having to get tough with their son that's apparently addicted to drugs. It seems that his rages, whilst under the influence, have seen him cause damage to property. All right, so that's your Sunday newspapers, and we'll be taking another look at those stories with our local editor a little bit later on in the program. But first, let's take a look at some of the trending topics on social media this morning, because a lot of you, that's where you get your news nowadays, isn't it? And so this is the list, and Casper forgives Ricky Rick. That's something for young people. The sacred space is always there. But the one that grabbed my attention, and I've got to say congratulations to them, is this one at number 4, and that's Mamelodi Sundowns. Of course, they have now won the domestic treble, and special moments with pictures celebrating this victory. The champions winning, of course, the PSL just last week, and now winning the Nedbank Cup. And this man saying since Peter Musumani took over at Mamelodi Sundowns, 5 PSL titles, 2 Nedbank Cups, 2 Telkom Knockout, CAF Champions League, CAF Super Cup, PSL Coach of the Season 4 times, African Coach of the Year. And this is massive, and that is quite a CV, isn't it, by any stretch of the imagination. And so all these tweets that we're seeing are really just celebrating what really has been quite a remarkable year for Sundowns, completing that treble, beating Bloemfontein Celtic in the Nedbank final yesterday. So Peter Musumani must be on cloud 9 and justifying his massive contract that he received. So Mamelodi Sundowns, there we go. Congratulations. The treble's not easy in any league, and that's Swallows FC saying congratulations to them. So well done, and there you go. A toast to the Sundowns. Flex the whole year. Congratulations, Sundowns. Okay, so very well done to the Sundowns. Domestic treble. Very few teams able to achieve such a significant result. Okay, right. We're going to be taking a look at how corporates and society can help the media stay alive and keep democracy alive after this.
Don't get to spend much time together these days. I miss our early morning coffee, jamming to our favorite songs, and rushing from work to get to gym.
MyWay's new MyWheels at-home cover could save you up to 20% because if you work from home, you should pay less.
The much talked about oversight inspection of the Bait Bridge border fence.
We're expecting a fence that is 2.2 meters up high, but we are seeing a fence that is 1.8 meters high. As you can see, it's already rusting as compared to a fence that was put in by March.
There is no doubt that this fence is a total sham. It is not fit for purpose, and the South African taxpayers have been robbed.
We live in a new high-tech environment. Because of technology, some of the world's wealthiest people are tech entrepreneurs. Tech is how we play and how we work. For your tech conversation, join me, Phumelele Zondi, on Network every Sunday at 8:30 p.m.
Now, welcome back. You're watching Media Monitor. In the last week of August, the South African Editors Forum, SANEF, hosted a webinar to unpack key concerns in the media sector. And one of the issues that was discussed was to encourage information and communications technology companies to zero-rate credible online news websites in order for millions of South Africans who can't afford data to be better informed and better able to participate actively in our democracy. The proposal was made by the newly elected chairperson of the South African National Editors Forum, Sibusiso Ngalwa. And he joins us now to unpack this whole story and this proposal. Let's speak to him now. Sibu, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Welcome to the program. I'm fascinated by this zero rating for news websites, but we'll talk about what that means just now. Let's start with what the problem statement was that informed you thinking along these lines.
Well, Peter, you would know that we're in the middle of a global pandemic, which has devastated and obliterated some of the media companies in this country. We've seen contraction of the media space, the jobs being lost and publications closing down. So as SANEF, we're having conversations as to how can we ensure the sustainability of the industry beyond COVID-19. You would know, Peter, that we already have set up a media relief fund, which is about immediate relief, which helps journalists. We've also paid out to over 227 journalists, each of them receiving 5,000 rand. Now, that was to help them with their immediate needs. But the conversations we need to have is what happens beyond the COVID-19. What kind of a media industry will we have? But also, how do we ensure, as the media fraternity, that there is a sustainable media and a robust and a strong independent media in this country beyond COVID-19? So that is what gave rise to these conversations to say, what are the options that we have? What are the issues that we can discuss among ourselves as the media, but also bringing in various stakeholders to say, we understand that the media is an important pillar of our democracy, and for our democracy and its vibrancy to thrive, we need a strong local media.
All right, so let's again connect the dots here. So if you don't have, and I think some of the statistics that came up were at least 80 community newspapers closed during COVID-19, and even more, hundreds in the last 10 years over time. So it wasn't just COVID-19, other reasons. With all of these publications disappearing, what does it mean for the citizen?
So, Peter, you know that the majority of the South African population are people who are marginalized and they are poor and that live on the fringes of the economy and the media by its nature. And this is a criticism of ourselves. The media does tend to focus on the moneyed class, so to speak, or the middle class, because you would understand that you have to appeal to advertisers and their living standard measurements that are in place. So you tend to have a media that is skewed towards that. The importance of local regional media, the importance cannot be overstated because that caters for specific communities. For instance, in a city like East London, where I hail from, there is a strong regional newspaper called the Daily Dispatch. In Port Elizabeth, you've got the Herald. Those are the newspapers that continue to hold the powerful and the politicians there accountable. I believe, Peter, the reason why we almost, in South Africa, there seems to be this generally accepted notion that the Eastern Cape is the most corrupt province stems from the fact that you have very strong local media, which you do not have in a province like Mpumalanga, which you don't have in a province like Limpopo. So it's not to say that the levels of corruption there are different from here. It's just that you do not have strong regional media in those places. So as I'm saying, the importance of those voices cannot be overstated. So if you have local media, local knock and drops closing down, that means that community is even poorer. It actually depletes the already available media outlets. And for democracy to thrive, you need as much voices, as much media voices as possible, and also to ensure diversity.
Yeah, and I suppose with local government elections on the horizon, citizens need to know what's being done in their name.
Exactly, Peter. So you can imagine the devastation of those 80 publications closing down. But secondly, when you have these publications closing down and also media companies getting less advertising revenue, what they tend to do, the first thing media companies tend to do is to close the bureaus. And it is really the far-flung bureaus that service those communities. So you can see that what that then says is that the attention switches to the urban centers. So what we're trying to do is to say that, and most people, as you know, as we're going to get into this discussion, it's the issue of cost and the cost of data and the cost of accessing some of this information, because media companies that were traditionally print that have switched to digital have put up paywalls where you have to pay for subscription. And members of the community cannot tell the difference between the money they pay for the data and the money for subscription. They are saying, why should I pay for data and then I pay to read an article, without actually understanding that the data that you are paying for goes to the cell phone network provider, while the subscription to read the article is for the media company to be able to be sustainable. Because the reality is, Peter, journalism costs money. It costs money to go and find those stories and to keep those media companies open. So it would make sense to all of us to share as much information as possible without expecting anything in return. But the reality is these are companies and they have to be sustainable. So we are having conversations among ourselves and with various stakeholders to say, what are the long-term plans? What do we do to ensure that even after, we knew, as you rightfully said, before COVID-19 that there was an attrition in the print media space. But what COVID-19 has done is that it has exacerbated the speed within which media companies are struggling or are being reduced. Their revenues are being reduced. It's actually been fast-tracked, which has resulted in some of the shocks to the system where you've seen some companies closing. So these are all part of the conversation that we're saying, to see that what does it mean? Will it help to maybe go the route of New Zealand, which has, and other countries that have introduced their own media funds, where broadcasters, for instance, they've waived transmission fees for broadcasters. And actually, they've gone as far as telling departments, directing money to state departments to buy paid subscription in newspapers in that country. You know, so these are some of the ideas. Nothing is cast in stone. No one silver bullet to help us. But what we need to do is to find different ways to make sure that the industry is sustainable.
All right, and I suppose a lot of people, they use their mobile phones regularly. Smartphones are becoming more and more available. And so this is where the zero rating kicks in, isn't it? And I suppose here your partners become the network providers. Tell us about what zero rating means and how that will be a game changer for consumers who just can't afford data.
So Peter, you would recognize firstly that during COVID-19, most media companies, even those that have paywalls, have actually made sure that COVID-19 related content is in front of the paywall. What that means is that if you have data, you can just get into that site and all the news that is related to COVID-19 is available for you to read. Zero rating refers to, in fact, let me make an example. What it refers to basically is that cell phone network providers would be able to avail certain sites for free that you don't need data to get to access those sites. You'll recall a while ago, for instance, MTN had what they called free Twitter. Everyone who was on MTN could be able to get to Twitter without having data. Now, the tertiary sector, the tertiary education sector, universities, most of the universities now, like UNISA and them, you can actually access their website and their tools on their website without having data, because those have been zero rated by the cell phone network providers. So what the idea here is that perhaps to ensure also the sustainability of the media industry, and also to make sure that there's free flow of information, because there is that attrition that I spoke about, where local communities do not have local sources of news, so that they can be able, even if they are poor, if they've got a cheap smartphone, to get into a news site and be able to access that information without having to pay for data. That actually is part of our responsibility as the media as well, to be able to make sure that there's free flow of information and free flow of credible information.
All right. So I guess the media houses then have to find a balancing act in terms of how do you get revenues, but also at the same time providing some free content.
Exactly. I think most media houses actually, those who are on digital platforms, follow the freemium model, which means that there is content that is free and there's content that is strictly for subscribers. So the important thing here, Peter, is that at the end of the day, we need to have a solution which benefits everyone, which is weighted accordingly, not to benefit one sector over another. I made the example of waiving of transmission fees for broadcasters elsewhere. I made the example of governments and other civil society, and even the corporate sector buying paid subscription in media companies. Those are as some of the models. So media companies as well have their own responsibility to ensure that besides making money out of journalism or being sustainable, we also have a service to render. As you would know, that we're fighting against an enemy called fake news or disinformation. And if you look at the data that came out in the research that we did at SANEF, it showed us that while there was a contraction in terms of circulation of print media companies, actually the audiences for digital sites actually trebled, in fact doubled for some. and they grow massively, which tells you that communities are looking for credible sources of information. Right. That is why it is important then to say that what do we do as the media to ensure that we continue to render that service, but at the same time, we continue to be sustainable as an industry.
Sbu Ngalwa, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much indeed for joining us. We wish you great luck with your endeavors here because access to information really is an important pillar of our democracy, especially as we go into an election cycle. Thanks so much indeed.
Thank you, Peter.
All right, that was Sbu Ngalwa, who's chairperson of the South African National Editors Forum, speaking to us about ways to try and keep the media in play, deep and wide media landscape, so that you, the citizen, are better informed and better able to make decisions about who should be leading you in your communities, your municipalities and national government, dare I say. All right, we're going to take a quick break and we'll continue with this theme, but we'll focus a lot more now on disinformation, particularly during election cycles.
Hello.
Ntate Mufamadi, good day to you. Where did you first find out about our insurance?
Yeah, I got a call from this guy. He said he wanted to compare my insurance. After asking me what car you drive, model and so on, he gave me an offer and that was over 470 less. I couldn't believe it at first. I thought it was a scam or something.
SMS saved 44211 or call 08 600 60,000 and Chencha Daiding.
We live in a new high-tech environment. Because of the technology, some of the world's wealthier people are tech entrepreneurs. Tech is how we play and how we work. For your tech conversation, join me, Phumelele Zondi, on Network every Sunday at 8:30 p.m.
The African Union condemned attacks against humanitarian and aid workers, saying the attacks violate international norms.
Before coronavirus, the African Union had a noble aim for 2020, silencing guns across the continent.
When we balance fighting COVID and silence the guns, we will be focused on achieving strategic mandates of our union.
The African Union is worried about the increasing violent extremism and terrorism, despite it joining the United Nations to call for ceasefires in the face of the pandemic.
Welcome back. You're still watching Media Monitor. Now, democratic elections rely on a competitive process, faith in the electoral institutions and informed participation. Well, the strategic deployment of false, exaggerated or contradictory information in the electoral environment has been a powerful tool for undercutting democracy in many places around the world. The most common forms of disinformation in the elections include the dissemination of fake news in order to discredit opponents or to influence the voting process, the falsification or the manipulation of polling data, and the use of fake election monitoring and observation. And with South Africa heading to the polls in 2021, it is feared that deliberately blurred lines between truth and fiction will increase, causing voter confusion and devalue fact-based political debate. All right, let's unpack this with someone who's been concerned with this for some time now, William Bird, Director of Media Monitoring Africa. Thanks so much indeed for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Hi, good morning. It's good to be with you.
All right, so as I was reading this intro and pondering this conversation, I kept on thinking about a president in North America and how he says certain things, and if you're not careful, it can become truth.
Yes, indeed. I mean, a man with hair worse than mine, which is quite an extraordinary achievement. So I think that there are a couple of things that, what the trends that we're seeing now in the United States really are warning signs for us in South Africa. You know, we're seeing stories about what would happen if, for example, the Trump campaign were to announce that they had won the elections before the formal results were announced. What kind of public violence potentially may that result in? What would that do to the actual announcement of the elections? So that would be, for example, in a scenario where they may not have won the elections. So there's all sorts of issues where, just the power of social media poses very real and fundamental challenges and threats to, democratic processes. And that's aside from the complexities that we see with running an elections. We then have the issues around structured strategic disinformation. We've seen a lot of accusations about the involvement of the Russians in the US elections and in the UK elections. And so these things are very, very difficult to combat. So really what we're trying to look at here is what steps can we take in South Africa to make sure that we are as election ready as we possibly can be to deal with the kind of threats that we know are coming.
Do you think that we are under threat here in South Africa? I mean, the American and the UK elections required some pretty serious sophistication. Are we seeing in South Africa people already trying to influence opinion? I mean, we had the famous Bell Pottinger drama, and I just wonder, are there people doing it already that we need to be worried about?
I mean, without a doubt, we've seen just recently, and you were a target of that vile campaign itself already, that Put South Africa First thing, which was a strategically coordinated campaign using social media to stir up, anger and xenophobia, quite broadly speaking. There's been some fascinating analyses of how that has worked. And so we know that as things are today, that there are people that are out there for a variety of reasons and motivations that are out there to try and destabilize our democracy. So there's no doubt that as we head towards elections in 2021, that there will be other groups that will come into play as well. Some of them will be very well resourced, and others probably not well resourced. But we know that is definitely a clear threat. And of course, the challenge is that we don't own these social media platforms. The way things stand at the moment, the public broadcaster, they've got very clear guidelines that they have to adhere to, all of our broadcasters, in fact, as do most of our other media. The biggest exception to that, of course, is the social media. They're based in faraway lands, and we're a relatively small country. So we need to make sure that we have plans in place that can deal with the kinds of things that we're going to see. So that's why part of the answer to this is that you have to have all of these different cogs in this machine working together in a reasonably well coordinated way. Gone are the days where you can say, okay, the IEC will deal with this. They can't. With the best will in the world, they can't deal with all of the various elements here. The media, similarly, with the best will in the world, they can't do all of the things that they need to. You need civil society, you need government, you need your Chapter 9 bodies, and you need the platforms as well. And of course, you need the ordinary voting public to all be playing their part to make sure that our elections aren't completely destabilized, because it's a very, very real threat,
So I guess the danger, and I'm not sure how one navigates this, because there's a space for free speech where you can say pretty much what you want, but then there is that border and that line where free speech becomes lies, and you are allowed to lie in real life, but when the lies become believed is when the danger comes, isn't it?
Well, it's not just that they lie. Of course, politicians, not just politicians in fairness to them, people lie the world over, and that's nothing new. What distinguishes a lie from, disinformation, I could be telling you that actually I'm doing this from a beach in Mauritius, and what a lovely day it is. And of course, that's a complete lie. I'm sitting in my dining room as I do this interview. Yeah. But that doesn't cause harm, and that's the distinction, right? So when the difference between disinformation is putting out false information with the intent to cause public harm, usually, or you don't even need intent necessarily, but the idea is that you can cause public harm with that disinformation. So, for example, what made that Put South Africa First were a lot of those comments that took them over the edge from just lies about, the role that foreigners play. pushed it over the edge into disinformation is the fact that those things can cause very real harm. We know that, South Africa is a very violent country. Yeah. What you don't need to be doing is stirring up hate and anger towards other groups, because that can very easily result in public harm. Similarly, if you go the day before the elections and you say the elections have been cancelled because of inclement weather, we're going to move them to the next day, that can very easily cause, public harm in the sense that people may not go and vote, and therefore the elections may be skewed. So that isn't just a lie. That's the very definition of disinformation. And that's why we talk about that as opposed to, some of those other terms. And it's also why it's important that the media are able to do their job in a way that is balanced, accurate, and fair.
All right. And I guess then what needs to happen is an education process to teach citizens to be more vigilant and more discerning. And how do they start to unpack what is real, what is fiction, and what's lies straddling between the two?
Well, yes. I mean, there are a number of things. So we're working on some things with some children about that. But for other members of the public, they can report content to real411.org. And in that process, hopefully they start to see what kinds of things are considered to be disinformation, because it is a lot of it's about the fact that if you don't share things, it's not, you prevent that spread of disinformation. So it's important that people do think before they share. That's one of the classic phrases at the moment, is think before you share. If you see content that you think makes you really angry, it makes you upset, or it makes you very fearful or scared, chances are you should probably not trust that content, even if it's from one of your close family members, and just hold off on sharing until you can verify if indeed that particular thing or story is true.
Do you think that we need to perhaps get our parliamentarians thinking about legislation that makes disinformation criminal and jailable?
So, under the Disaster Management Act regulations that we're living under now, that our government has for the first time introduced a very specific regulation about that criminalizes effectively disinformation. It's that if you intentionally spread false information about the COVID virus or government's response to it, in order to deliberately deceive someone, then you will be guilty of an offense. So there is already a very, very tightly defined section that deals with that in our regulations. The real problem is that the moment governments the world over decide that they want to try and regulate this, almost in every single instance, it's a disaster. Why? Because what happens the world over is that governments see this as another way of being able to control what people say. And they also hand it over to ministers. So you've got in a number of countries, the minister deciding whether or not something is true or not, and whether or not it constitutes disinformation. Now, of course, in all countries, ministers have a vested interest in determining that some things may be more true and other things may be less true. So if you expose scandal in their department, the chances are they're going to say, no, this is just not true, right? So that's a very damaging thing. And globally, this is a challenge, which is why, a system like Real 411, which sits independently of those things but works with government, and to our government's credit, they really do deserve a lot of credit for the fact that they haven't just said, okay, we're going to just try and regulate the hell out of this thing. And maybe it's because they know that our constitution won't let them get away with that kind of thing, but certainly we need to have a level of acknowledgement that trying to regulate our way out of this particular problem is not going to solve it. Because even if you did regulate it and you say we're going to make it an offence, the wheels of criminal justice turn so slowly that with the best will in the world, you're not going to be able to prevent that harm from scaling by the time your police have got the case, they've investigated, they've gone to the service provider, they've gone to the platform, they've said remove it, right? That kind of old system and that way of our justice system just isn't engineered for that kind of thing. You need solutions that are agile and fast and can independently make things that can reduce that harm. And then you can still look at other ways of dealing with it. Like, if people are putting out hate speech, you deal with it on the basis of hate speech and not necessarily on the basis of disinformation. And you put out counter narratives.
All right, we've run out of time, but there's one thing I would like to ask. And I just wonder, on Twitter, you've got verified accounts with a blue tick. Should we perhaps be thinking about verifying websites, that they have some kind of tick so that people know that this is a credible source?
Well, it's already there in South Africa. There's an extension you can download called No News, KNOW, No News. And if you go use that in your browser and you go to a website, if it comes up green, it means it's credible, and that means a number of things. And you can go and look up more about that on newstools.co.za.
So what's it called?
News Tools. The extension is called No News, KNOW, and that's where there's a whole range. We've been gathering up lists and lists for a couple of years now of sites that are credible and offer credible news and information, because of course they can be small, but they can also be large, like the SABC.
Fantastic. That's great to know, and I think we need to keep on telling people about that. William Bird, thanks very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, that's William Bird, Director of Media Monitoring Africa, talking about disinformation and the difference between lying that sometimes is not harmful to the general public and disinformation, which can cause great harm. All right, now, yesterday, September 12, marked 43 years since the killing of anti-apartheid activist and black consciousness movement leader Bantu Stephen Biko. News anchor Simpiwe Ngongwane spoke to veteran journalist Matata Tsedu, looking at the role the media played during Biko's times and compared that to the role of the media today. And this is what he had to say.
The stories that you had to do, for example, around the army and the police had to be vetted by the Bureau of State Security. And if they said, no, you can't say this, you wouldn't be able to write it. You would have to find different ways of getting the information out. Today, those challenges are not there. People are free to write. And there's a tendency amongst people with gray beard like me who want to say, during our time we did much, much better than everybody else. If you look at the media today, you will realize that the media is fulfilling its functions to the hilt today, because we know what is happening, and that is really what the role of media is, to ensure that people are properly informed so that they can make their important decisions about their lives from an informed position. And if you look at the kind of stories that are happening, the existence of the Zondo Commission, for example, is a result of a lot of media work that was done.
South African media in particular has been labelled as a very liberal media, especially on the continent. And having said that, should South African media be viewed through the lens of being a panacea for media freedom? And what's the state of media freedom on the continent?
Well, it is not easy to give an overall answer for the whole continent and say this is the state of media freedom on the continent. There are pockets of supreme repression on our continent. Places like Eritrea, Zimbabwe it's one of those examples right now. Ethiopia. There are many countries where journalists are in jail, and that's a blot. But there are also many other places where media used to be just state-owned, and there is now a plethora of independently owned television stations, radio stations, and newspapers that are telling the stories of their countries without interference from governments.
In other news on the continent, two Somali journalists working for local radio station Radio Jaljeer were arrested after approaching a court in Somalia's northeastern region, Puntland, for a reaction to the case of a woman who had been raped and murdered. Qadar Al-Ismail is the director of Radio Jaljeer and the NUSOJ General Secretary of Information and Human Rights. Abdul Khani Ahmed Mohammed works as a reporter and producer at the station. Radio Jaljeer had interviewed the victims' relatives who criticized the court for releasing the accused perpetrators. Meanwhile, two Egyptian journalists, Hani Grisha and Syed Seta, employed by the Cairo-based newspaper Yom 7, were taken from their homes late last month and are yet to be released. According to reports, one of them, who had COVID-19 at the time of his arrest, has been hospitalized. Relatives of the two journalists have only just managed to confirm the court orders were issued at the start of September for them to be detained provisionally for an initial 15 days. Okay, so that's the news across the continent, but now we go for news that takes us back in history. And in this week's feature, we take you back to the year 1996, and that was when former President Mandela went to the United Kingdom on a state visit and was a guest of Queen Elizabeth II, who we often called Elizabeth, we're told. He stayed at Buckingham Palace, and that's a rare honour that's given to a head of state and somebody much more prominent in terms of countries than South Africa. So that's how significant he was, and his significance of his visit and respect that was afforded to President Mandela. No less than 15 universities offered Mr. Mandela degrees, and as I said, this was unprecedented for any visiting head of state to Britain. And speaking outside 10 Downing Street with the then Prime Minister John Major, he spoke about South Africa's economic plans for the future. Listen carefully and just make up your mind about how that journey did carry on. This is how Conrad Burke covered the story for us back then.
Britain today committed itself to securing the best trade deal for South Africa with the European Union. The trade deal has been described as the economic lifeline for South African reconstruction. President Mandela drew 2 standing ovations from the captains of British industry today, the second day of his state visit to Britain.
Today was devoted to spade work, an early start in St. James Park, a tree and a bit of Mandela magic. Then to the Barbican for the Confederation of British Industry's high-powered forum on investing in South Africa. Among some here, a mood of impatience, among others, optimism.
Everybody here in the city wants to see South Africa succeed. It's vital to the whole future of Africa. There have been some very good declarations recently by the government, 14th of June. And everybody is hoping now to see that followed up by action.
I think there's a lot of disappointment, not at what's going on in South Africa, but the speed at which change is occurring.
What he's communicating here is that we are consolidating our democracy, and South Africa is working, and we are ready for investment.
From the podium, the message was, Britain is South Africa's biggest foreign investor, and they intend holding on to that position.
South Africa has a very substantial investment in Britain, and Britain is the biggest foreign investor in South Africa. I'm very keen that British business should continue to lead the way in this investment.
President Mandela drew a standing ovation even before he said a word. He gave what is as close as you could get to an undertaking on privatization.
Our government fully comprehends that the resources we command in the form of public corporations have to be restructured to become more efficient, to provide affordable services, to inject a new technology, and to promote the overall growth objectives of the nation. In this regard, firm decisions have been taken to privatize some of them, to acquire strategic equity partners for others, and to redefine the role of the remaining ones.
And he said some of the steps, which include curbing wage increases and rewarding productivity, will hurt back home. The response in the hall, another standing ovation. Later, at number 10 Downing Street, an announcement that Britain was giving South Africa 400 million rands for technical training.
There's one other area where I believe the United Kingdom can be of some help to South Africa, and that is helping to negotiate the best possible relationship with the European Union so that the markets, not just in the United Kingdom, but right across Europe, are open to the largest possible extent to South African exports.
And a reassurance from President Mandela.
There will be life after this president has gone. Not only will there be life, but you will see dramatic changes much at a faster pace than I am able to do at the present moment.
There's no easy answer on investment. Yes, Britain wants to stay South Africa's top investor, but there's a clear message here for swift and decisive action on key issues like privatizing state corporations and reining in wage increases. Today, President Mandela gave notice this was the direction the government was moving in. Conrad Burke, TV News, outside number 10 Downing Street.
All right, so it was a very special and significant time, and so that was the business end, and you must have heard 1996, the conversation was about privatization of state assets. Interesting. And of course the visit happened over a number of days, and the highlight was and must have been the meeting and staying with the Queen. And the story goes that President Mandela affectionately called Her Majesty my friend Elizabeth. Let's take a look.
President Nelson Mandela today received red carpet treatment at the start of his state visit to Britain. Britain's Queen Elizabeth, the Duke of Edinburgh and Prime Minister John Major were among those who gathered in London to accord him a hero's welcome.
The closeness, the two nations celebrating. That's the theme coming through at the start of this state visit. For Britain, it's a visit of the highest order. And here that means pulling out all the stops. And if anyone knows ceremonial, it's the British. The start of the visit at Horse Guards, a huge parade ground in the heart of London. For Queen Elizabeth and the Duke of Edinburgh, President Mandela's visit is also in a sense returning the hospitality that South Africa extended to the Queen on her visit to South Africa last year. But behind all the pomp and ceremonial, this is also a working visit. Britain is the second largest supplier of goods to South Africa. In investment, she's the largest source of direct foreign investment, almost 12,000 million rands. And with Mr. Mandela is a strong contingent of government and business leaders. Ministers like Alec Erwin, Mac Maharaj, Kader Asmal, and deputy ministers, including Finance Deputy Joel Marcus, are prominent in the team. But today, it was the ceremonial and Buckingham Palace. It didn't stop Mr. Mandela from acknowledging cameramen he recognized. Tonight, Mr. Mandela will be feted at a state banquet in Buckingham Palace. For those watching, a day to bristle with pride.
Very proud. I'm actually very, very proud. You know, it's like you come here and everyone keeps asking about the politics and everything, but today I felt very, very proud to be South African. Really did.
I'm from Johannesburg. Presently, I'm based in Germany, but when I heard Mr. Mandela is coming over to meet the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh, I was so excited. I decided I'm crossing the sea. I'm going to be there. I have to be in this occasion.
Well, I think it's unique, you know, in this century.
I can't explain or express my feeling about the man. The man is so huge. I can't express my feelings.
I love it.
Viva Mandela!
It's a very, very lovely feeling. It's undescribable.
It's almost as if Britain today has been saluting one of its finest sons, and that's what it's all about. That's what the media here are saying. Nelson Mandela is the world's. What he represents, forgiveness, reconciliation, talking together, are qualities the whole world needs now. Conrad Burke, TV News, Buckingham Palace.
All right, so that was 1996. Let's come back home and to the present time, and we take a look at our local papers here in South Africa. And for that, we're now joined by the editor of the Behind the News Network, Joe Mhlanga. Joe, it's been a while. How are you keeping?
I'm good, Peter. It's been a while. It's been a very long time. In fact, I should be wearing a mask, but I'm alone, so there's no one around me.
All right, so let's get straight into the papers. Which one grabbed your attention first?
In fact, there's 4 of them, but the interesting one is the trip to Zim with the ANC
Sunday
delegation.
Times, yeah?
Sunday Times, and then there was the story on the mystery 100,000 that was deposited on a different paper. Then the corruption in the ANC, then the 35 million fronting. But the one that caught my attention, it's the trip to Zim.
So talk to us about that, because the Air Force jet landed and it was supposed to be an ANC party-to-party interaction, but there were government ministers on the plane. So questions are now being raised. Was it a government trip? Was it a party trip?
It looks like it involved both, because I saw a comment by one of the NEC members, Ms. Nomvula, said now the trip was planned at Lutuli House. So that tells us that it was an ANC party-to-party meeting. But now it's now involved with the state at the same time, because again, we're back to Waterkloof being used as an exit point, and previously it was a landing point for some. So it looks like now the president said the statement that is being made now, he broke his silence and talking about it. Meanwhile, it is the insiders are saying he knew about it. So it was supposed to be a party-to-party, but now state resources are being used at the same time. And questions also come to say, this meeting couldn't have waited for level 1, where people were free to move. Why are the elite are able to move within the region, while we know it's a lockdown? So even within the party, you can see that there's bigger problems there. So to me, there's more to this than what we see.
Yeah, and it looks like the public protector may be involved in investigating this at some point. Let's talk about that 100,000 Rand deposit and that Nedbank. A big question has been raised around them.
It's highly impossible to deposit 100,000 and no details are filled up to a point where it's now being investigated up to this much. Is this the only 100,000 that was deposited, or is this the start, or there's more to this? But it is very strange, because whenever you deposit, even if it's 10 Rand, even if it's 20 Rand, you have to put your details. So this could also open up another can of worms as far as how monies are moving within the cycles of this kind of dealings within the government officials. So it looks very much like there's more to this than what we see. And also, is it only 100,000? And I think if this scope can be broadened up, we will see a very serious showdown on this one. It is very concerning, so to say.
All right, and again involving the embattled former eThekwini Mayor Zandile Gumede with that tender scandal. So this is a party under pressure, isn't it?
If you look at how now you also question the kind of reportings that we get. Few weeks ago, she was now accepted as an MP in the province, and then a week later, there were other issues where she was told to take a step back. And then again now, there's a build-up of other events. These things are coming up. Now, you're hearing a lot of people, this morning people that were reading the news, they were saying, is this still about the factional party politics, or is this a real corruption that we're looking at? Because, and how it's being reported, it's still going to be happening around the same thing. Someone was saying to me, we're looking at this leaf, yet there's a bigger tree. Now there's this whole entire thing about PPE, But why are we still being pushed to look at all the other smaller things that have happened while the bigger things are happening at the very same time?
Yeah.
Why are we pushed to look at Zandile while other people are coming in and the monies that are being taken are bigger than what Zandile is alleged to have been involved
Mr.
with?
Mhlanga, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks so much indeed, and we look forward to seeing you again soon and not waiting so long in between. Thanks so much for your insights. Always greatly appreciated.
Thank you so much, Peter.
Thanks, my brother. All right, that's Joe Mhlanga speaking to us there about local media. All right, and that's where we say goodbye. Thanks very much indeed for watching our show, Media Monitor, and we hope that you'll join us again at the same time, same place next week. In the meantime, though, please take care of each other, wear your mask, social distancing, stay at home, sanitize, wash hands, do everything. It's a very important time. Goodbye, everyone.
Vito ra mina I Hlengani Patrick Mavasa ni mudyondzisi exikolweni xa Hanyanyani ni sungule ku tumbuluxa leswaku Hanyanyani ku va na mini cricket. Vanhu hinkwavo lava va ri ku voneni ka television siku leri ra 18 February 2018 loko ni fanele nika man of the match exikarhini ka Afrika-Dzonga na India va swi tiva leswaku ri SABC ya swi kota ku fikelela na le ka tindhawu te le kule laha ku nga kule swinene na laha migingiriko ya cricket yi tlanga kona. Swikolo swa Giyani swa swi tlanga mini cricket swi sukile eka 6 swi va 18 hi vito ra SABC Sport.
First, I want to salute the workers, the frontline workers, who are from time to time facing serious challenges.
Our sincere